Hey everybody, this is Dr. Maples. We're here with our last lecture for content analysis. Let's talk about walking through an example content analysis to see what we do. Now, I've already mentioned this, it's no surprise. We're going to follow some of the same steps we've already learned. We're going to establish a sociological research question. We're going to make sure and try to measure something or examine something that has to do with how our society functions. Once we have a research question, we can now create some hypotheses to test. And these are, again, going to be very similar to how we might have done things for our observations or our interviews. Perhaps less similar to our surveys, which might look a little bit more like secondary data analysis that we'll talk about in our next lecture. We'll just put that on pause for there. Now, we're going to code the information that we find, our variables. We're going to craft them and code them very similar to what we did in interviews and observations. And then we use that, whether it's qualitative or quantitative, to kind of go back and test our hypotheses. Now, I want to make a point about the content analysis that we need to be really aware of as we start to get into its analysis steps. As with interviews, as with observations, make sure the codes that you have are very clear and defined. But with content analysis, we also want to make sure that there's something that would be understood over time. We want to make sure that they're stable. Remember, when we're analyzing media, things change. In fact, if you were to go back and look at how the internet looked in 1998, for example, it was wildly different. I mean, I can't even explain how different it was than today's internet. It was just a completely different thing. This is coming from a guy who first used a personal computer in 1996, when I was 18 years old. So, or thereabouts. We want to make sure, though, our codes make sense over time. As such, it's really good to make sure that you conceptualize what you mean by a code, to give a really clear definition of what you're trying to look at. We'll play with that in just a moment. We also want to make sure, too, that if someone were to go through and use your codes to recode the videos that you watched based on your question, we want to make sure that they would reproduce the same findings. Would you find out that your codes through the open and focused coding process maybe weren't defined enough, or maybe they should have been collapsed or expanded? This is, again, where something that just comes with time, of getting the experience of doing this, but it's something that you want to keep in mind, that if someone else were going to go through and code this, would you have the same findings? Finally, we want to make sure that if prior studies have established standard codes for doing this, you should use those. That said, that's not something at an undergraduate level that's probably going to come up a lot. That's usually more of a grad student, PhD publication problem. So if you do happen to see that someone else has done a content analysis of the exact same thing that you want to do, use their codes. Save yourself some time, because you can replicate what they've done. And by doing that, it makes your paper into something that you might actually be able to publish someday. You could share your findings. Otherwise, do what you find is effective for you. And especially, too, if you're not thinking about publishing your work, then you can go right back to not needing to reinvent the wheel, and just do what feels right. Now, let's walk through an example of this. I have started gaming. My child got a PS4 this year, and so I've started playing video games again for the first time in about 15 years or so. And it's been really fun for me to also see that there's a whole world of YouTube gaming channels out there where I can also get the satisfaction of watching someone else play a game that maybe I don't want to invest my time in. So I can see them summarize 10 hours into an hour's worth of video and kind of get the same level of enjoyment that I might have learning the plot of that game. So let's do a media or content analysis of the media here to see what we might learn about it. One thing that I'd noticed is that people treat that like and subscribe process of YouTube videos very differently based on perceptions of their sex. My perceptions of their sex. I often find that people who I think I would identify as being male are very aggressive about telling people you have to subscribe, you have to like this video, whereas people I might identify as being female are less apt to do that. They are probably more passive about it. So I decided, as a sociologist, I would explore this just a little bit more for our class. So my research question, my sociological research question, is to explore how YouTube gaming channels encourage users to like and subscribe based on sex. And my first hypothesis is that channels featuring male leads will aggressively pursue subscribers compared to channels with female leads. And my second hypothesis is that channels featuring male leads will directly pursue liking the video compared to channels with female leads. For both of these, we would establish null hypotheses that there's no relationship here between the idea of perceived sex and the subscribing process or the liking process. Let's look into our content analysis. So I'm going to do a couple of things in putting together a content analysis. And by the way, I want you to pay a special attention to this, because this is something that we're going to start doing in our last lectures of the semester as we start to talk about our final. We're going to have two sections of our content analysis. The first part is methods. The second part is analysis. Now, in methods, this is a section where I go about telling folks exactly how I did my study. This includes stating my questions, my hypotheses, variables, and talking about the data that I work with. One quick note about that: I'll never say I, my, me, anything first person in this section. In fact, all of your scientific papers from here on out will not use I, my, me, or any other first person that you might use in the writing. What instead you're going to use is the phrase the researcher. The researcher is technically third person. I hate it. I absolutely hate it. In fact, it's contradictive to everything that I've learned about writing research that's personalized and applied. But that said, it is something that's expected for publications, that we don't say I, me, we, and so forth. We use the researcher or the researchers. So as the researcher would tell us about their research questions, the hypotheses, variables, and so forth. That's that methods section. Now, in the second section is what we call an analysis section. And this is where you actually going to tell me, as the researcher, what you found. And most importantly, how can you describe your variables? And can you test your hypotheses and tell me what you found? So think about that as we go forward. The first part is what we do is the methods. We say how we did everything. The second part is the analysis of what we actually found. So let's look at the methods for how I'm going to do this YouTube study on perceived sex and gaming, and how the different sexes might approach the idea of like and subscribe. So for this, I'm going to tell you some of the data that I have. First off, I selected 10 random gaming videos, and I kept randomizing them until I had 5 that I identified as being male leads and 5 that I identified as female leads. Now, to be very clear, there's all sorts of risk of bias and things like that, because my identification of someone's sex is the best that I have here. I can't really contact them and get that information, and it's definitely not included in their YouTube profile. So this is just my guess, but I've put in 5 for male, 5 for female. This also, too, is very limiting to the binary, so I want to point that out as well, but this is what I'm doing as a simplified study. Next, what I want to do is link some codes into my hypotheses and my variables. So I'll need a variable for sex. I've got that. I went through and identified the male or female lead for those two categories. Again, using a binary, which is problematic, but we're keeping things simplistic here. Second, I went through to try to identify levels of response for how they chose to do the like and the subscribe. So for both like and for subscribe in my hypotheses, I have 3 levels. That they can be aggressive, so that means that they used strong language or a strong voice or very powerful, maybe a high voice, but they were very pushy about, you have to do this, you have to subscribe to my channel, or you have to like this video. I used a passive category, which means that they mentioned it as if it was an afterthought. Oh, and like and subscribe would be a good example of that. And then I also put in a category for not mentioned at all, that they didn't mention the idea of liking or subscribing in the videos at all. I then go through and I watch all of the videos and I do open coding. Again, thinking about my hypotheses and my variables here, where I'm establishing to what degree they talked about the like and the subscribe. All what I would do is pull out maybe some quotes, maybe some timestamps, since these are YouTube videos, for how they talked about the like and the subscribe in terms of my coding of aggressive, passive, or not mentioned. And after I've done that, I'll go through and do it a second time to do a focused coding. Maybe that would be a point that I found out that 3 levels isn't enough. Maybe it should be 2 levels, or maybe it should be 4 levels. Maybe there's something in between aggressive and passive, like sort of a neutral approach. I don't know. For me, I didn't see that need, but that might be where a focused round of coding might make a change. Here's my analysis. And look, this cool little table that I built here. So this table 1 talks about the likes and the subs, and I've split them up by my perceived measure of sex, which was just male and female, focusing on a binary, which I can't repeat it enough. Focusing on a binary is something that's problematic, but we're trying to keep this study simple in this case. So for my male section, I founded 5 cases where I coded the video as being an aggressive request to subscribe, and 0 cases where it was passive, and the 0 is missing there, but there was no instances of a no mention. They always were aggressive about the subscriptions. Female, I found, however, was slightly different. Only 1 person was aggressive, 3 of the females were more passive, and 1 was a no mention. When it goes to the likes, I also found 2 that males were generally very aggressive about the likes, only 1 being passive. And with female, we found there was kind of a split between aggressive, passive, and then again, 1 person being no mention. I will point out too that the no mentions on the female side for subscriptions and for likes were the same video. So that kind of gives us a sense of where that sits. So we already have some really cool quantitative data where I've gone through and quantified my codes. Now, when I do the analysis, this is where I can talk about things. I'll talk about my tables. That's where my tables will fall. And then I can talk more about maybe some quotes that I pulled out. I want to start, though, with my overall findings. So my hypothesis was I thought that males would be more aggressive about pursuing likes and subscriptions. And here we seem like we have some examples of that. From my analysis, I found overall that males were far more aggressive based on the codes. A couple of examples include in using obscenities or sexual wordplay to encourage subscriptions and likes. There was 1 random video where the male indirectly threatened to hurt people if they did not like and subscribe. So that really struck out to me. There was nothing comparable to that people to the categories where I identified the lead as being female. Females showed that they were far more likely to make a less of a big deal about it. And of course, in 1 case, we had the video not bothering to like or subscribe ever to talk about it at all. But some examples of the more passive approach were thanks, feel free to like and subscribe, or I hope you liked the video, see you next time. Kind of sounds like things Dr. Maples would say in his videos. I should have you like and subscribe. Anyways, but not by threatening people like males were doing. It was so strange to see that just simple thing. And this is just a very simple undergraduate level kind of analysis. So we can see that we can kind of test out these hypotheses. And we found that it seems pretty evident based on the videos that we selected that males generally were more aggressive about this than females. So this was exciting. Now, there were some other things that really stuck out to me that might also go into the analysis. And I really found it very interesting that there was sort of a conditional exchange for people who would identify as female. So they might say something like, thanks for watching, like and subscribe if you enjoyed this content, and I'll make more videos for you. So if you do this, I'll do this. Whereas males were just straight up threatening about it. One of my favorite ones, the guy starts his videos with like, if you don't like and subscribe, you're a blanking idiot. And there were also 2 cases too where the male lead made the like and subscribe process into a sexual connotation. So it was intriguing to see how different sexes try to approach these ideas. Again, this is sociological because it all goes back to how we're socialized differently on how people build certain expectations around our sex. That's a basic content analysis. In fact, that's pretty much what you could do for your own paper. Now remember, in this class, you're going to be doing 2 approaches that you get some experience with. You have interviews, you have surveys, interviews, observations, and content analysis as options. You're going to choose 2 of them. The assignments for that are on Blackboard. And if you liked content analysis, then this is a great one for you to do because you could take a chance to study what you want to study. Feel free to choose this for that option if you liked it. Also to note that there's an example here that you can kind of follow if you want to use that. Now, where do we go from here? This is where things get especially exciting for me. We spend pretty much the last month of the class on 2 lectures that cover 1 assignment. Our last tool that we're going to learn this semester is an important one, and that's secondary data analysis using statistics. Now, Remember, content analysis is an example of secondary data analysis where we're analyzing someone else's data. Well, for this last step in the semester, we're going to take some of the things that you probably learned from SOC 232, and we're going to apply those to do some basic statistical testing. Now, quick note, if you didn't take SOC 232, it's helpful for me if you just send me an email and let me know so that I know. Even if we've talked about it before, it's useful to have that heads up. If you haven't talked about or taken 232, that's okay too. You can still have perfect success in this assignment because I literally break things down to the absolute minimum and take you step by steps through them. We're going to learn to do a couple of things, though, in there. We're going to learn to work with something called R. R is a very popular open source statistical format that is available to you for the rest of your days. You don't have to pay for it. You can download it, and it's on your computer forever. And you can use that to do all sorts of things in the job market. We're going to learn to describe some data that's provided to us. And also, I'm going to teach you how to do a t-test, which is where we see if the means of a score vary based on being in one category or another. Now, the final assignment of this semester is going to be exactly what I'm saying here, but in slight more detail. And I'm also going to have a lecture that does nothing but walk you through your final. That makes sure that in the next lecture, we teach you how to use R, and then we're going to go through the process of making sure that you know exactly what I'm expecting in the final, making sure that you feel 100% comfortable when you turn that in at the end of the semester. So that's where we are. We've got very little content left, but that also means we got to double down and make sure you get your assignments done. Make sure to work on those assignment number 3 where you're doing 2 approaches. Make sure to knock out the survey, the interview, observation, or content analysis because you're going to pick 2 of those. If you have questions about that, you let me know. There's handouts on Blackboard that should explain it, but if you have questions, I'm here to talk about it. So that wraps things up for us. If you need anything, I'm here. Let me know. Otherwise, I'll see you next time. Take care.